Back in those days, the time frame of Apple Computer, if I had lived somewhere else other than Silicon Valley, it's a lot less likely that I would have done what I did.
Silicon Valley created these amazing inventions that changed the way we live our lives.
There is a cultural magic here that makes Silicon Valley work.
It's an idea. It's a new invention. It's a way of life. That's Silicon Valley.
Just south of San Francisco, it's only 30 miles long and 15 miles wide. But the impact of what's been created here is beyond calculation. How did it happen? And why did it happen here?
This is a whole ecosystem. It's a whole region that's just one giant incubator or accelerator. There were a lot of things present in this place that allowed people who were ready to seize an opportunity to do that.
People like the founders of Hewlett-Packard and Intel, Apple, and Facebook.
Those are folks who did amazing things, but they did amazing things because of a very resource-rich environment in which they found themselves here.
The unique and significant thing about Silicon Valley is that it is a technology ecosystem. Everything is there, as well as the ethos of creativity and building and inventing is all there.
From Texas to Colorado, Israel to India, Korea to China, dozens of technology centers are trying to imitate Silicon Valley. But this place has something unique.
This is a melting pot of engineers and entrepreneurs that you don't find anywhere else. And knowing that these people are usually one connection away from somebody else is what makes it successful.
When I talk to visitors about this, the question that most of these people ask amounts to, what's your secret sauce? And my answer to that is, over time, we've built this very favorable habitat.
Here, the people who can make innovation happen are all packed together in one place.
A lot of the most valuable things that happen to startups are serendipitous meetings. Like Facebook. Zuckerberg is walking down the street and he runs into Sean Parker just at random on the sidewalk because Sean Parker has just been kicked out of his girlfriend's house.
It's 2004, and Parker, only 24, is hailed as a visionary. He co-founded Napster, the notorious website that gave music away for free. Well connected in the Valley, he knows just the kind of people the ambitious Harvard sophomore needs to meet.
Mark Zuckerberg starts Facebook in Boston, but he moves it to Silicon Valley. Why? To access the talent.
Zuckerberg had come here just with this sort of vague idea that Silicon Valley was the place to be, and Parker was here already because he already knew Silicon Valley was the place to be, and so because they both thought that, they bumped into each other.
Parker urges Zuckerberg not to go back to Harvard, helps him open a bank account, and introduces him to people with the knowledge and money to help him.
They were able to draw on all of the ecosystem. All of these people brought their Rolodexes and relationships in to help Facebook grow as fast as it could. Without that ecosystem, which does not exist in Boston, Facebook would not have grown as quickly.
Silicon Valley is just this petri dish of all of these people together in proximity. You just are in a place where everyone around you is part of this larger project.
But as recently as the 1950s, the Valley, then known as the Santa Clara Valley, is celebrated for something quite different. Its vast expanses of fruit orchards.
Everywhere you look, for miles and miles, it was just orchards of cherry trees, apricot trees, and prune trees. It was just such a wonderful time there.
Throughout the world, wherever you go, Sunsweet prunes contribute to the enjoyment and health of everyone.
But gradually, the valley is transformed. Its land put to even more profitable use for Cold War industries like missiles and aviation.
Industrial opportunities abound in the Valley of Heart's Delight. Mild climate.
And to build all that hardware, companies bring in thousands of engineers whose enthusiasm for making things proves contagious, especially for their kids, some of whom are about to shake up the world.
A lot of the kids on my block, maybe half of them, had parents that were engineers. My father was an electrical engineer, and he took me to work one day, and I liked what he did and thought, wow, I would like to be an engineer someday. And I discovered a journal in the hall closet, and it had an article telling how ones and zeros made up numbers in computers and how you could add them or subtract them, kind of like the way we do with our numbers. And I said, wow, I practiced on paper, and I said, wow, I learned how to do that. And I told myself inside at a very young age, computers are going to be the most fascinating thing in my life. It's going to be my passion for life.
To build his own computer, Wozniak wants tiny electronic parts called transistors that work as amplifiers or switches, but they're not cheap. He gets some timely help from the Polaris missile, which relies on transistors and is made at the Lockheed factory where his father works.
My father had connections there with the silicon companies, and he got a donation of 400 cosmetic reject transistors.
Parts that enable the precocious 8th grader to get his start.
And if I hadn't been here in Silicon Valley, it just wouldn't have happened. I would have been reading about things in magazines, maybe educating myself, maybe knowing how to do it, but I was really close to the source.
Wozniak's friend from nearby Los Altos, Steve Jobs, also learns electronics from his dad, Paul Jobs, a machinist. Jobs spends his free time with Wozniak, talking about their favorite subject, computers. In 1975, they joined the Homebrew Computer Club, a magnet for electronics obsessives.
The Valley is so rich in engineering, particularly aerospace engineering at that time, that a club can form in which people can make hobbyist computers using technologies that are from the companies all around them.
You know, if you want to know what's going to happen in 5 years, you don't look in the mainstream, you look at the fringe. And the fringe back in 1975 was the Homebrew Computer Club. Everybody that was interested in building computers was at that meeting. And Woz and I always had the coolest stuff there.
At the club, Wozniak shows off a computer he's built. He and Jobs will soon name it the Apple I. The two hobbyists are also inspired by the counterculture in San Francisco, a movement that rejects the way computers are being used by the government and the military.
I wanted to be a part of this revolution. The word revolution itself struck me so deeply. I just wanted to change things from horrible Vietnam War type days and everything. I wanted to be a part of it. That's one of the reasons I developed my computer. I wanted to help that revolution go forward.
Steve Jobs is also a rebel. He embraces Zen Buddhism, listens to Bob Dylan, and feels his life has been changed by LSD.
I don't remember how the subject came up, but at one point he turned to me and he said, you know, LSD is one of the 2 or 3 most significant things that I've ever experienced.
Non-traditional experiences have helped greatly in doing the things that I've tried to do in the last 10 years. Hitchhiking around the country, or bicycling across Canada, or heading off to the Himalayas, or going to sit in a monastery in Kyoto.
Inspired by these new ways of thinking, in 1976, Jobs and Wozniak start the company whose creations will one day change billions of lives.
So they formed Apple Computer, and they set up shop in Jobs' father's garage, and I went to work there. And we were going to create computers and sell them to people who wanted them.
Soon, a local hobbyist shop orders 50 Apple I's, and they get built in the garage, a Silicon Valley tradition that dates back to the 1930s, when Bill Hewlett and David Packard started tinkering in their own garage in Palo Alto.
I really think the modern world starts right there, in that humble little building.
A building that would soon give rise to one of the most legendary and enduring companies in the history of Silicon Valley. Meditation rooms, hair salons, fitness centers, free meals and stock options. With all the perks and comforts it offers, the Silicon Valley office is a place designed to keep workers happy.
They give you free lunch, they give you free dinners, they give you free shuttles, they give you free laundry, free haircut, free dentist, free everything. Just stay, don't go.
Silicon Valley's signature style of workplace, seductive yet demanding, has been crucial to its success. And its characteristics began to take shape in the days when the Valley was first embracing electronics.
A lot of the things you see in modern Silicon Valley, Google, bring the dog and have them sleep in the cubicle, and, the cafeteria with all the free food and all of those things, very much a imitation of the HP way.
The Hewlett-Packard Way, a philosophy of running a company that reflects the beliefs of the tech giant's founders, David Packard and William Hewlett.
Hewlett-Packard is the founding company of what we think of as modern Silicon Valley, because it's a garage startup. It produced electronic products. It grew into this mammoth company. It redefined how employees are treated, and it had as many personnel innovations as it had technology innovations.
The HP Odyssey begins back in 1938, when Stanford engineering professor Fred Terman makes a proposition to two of his former students.
Terman said, look, I'll provide funding, $500. Let's go. So the two of them formed a company in David Packard's garage, and they didn't have a first product in mind.
Could you have envisioned the future products?
Heavens, no. Our primary interest was to get something that brings some money in the door. We tried all kinds of things. We tried building shocking machines to make people lose weight, a device to tune harmonicas, air conditioning control.
Finally, they get off the ground with something called an audio oscillator.
I guess the best way is to turn it on. You hear what it sounds like. So it produces a variable tone. And that's just part of the range.
Their first big sale, Walt Disney buys 8 oscillators for his movie Fantasia. His engineers use them like electronic tuning forks to make sure the movie sounds exactly the way it should in theaters. And HP is on its way. It moves on to produce all kinds of electronics: microwave generators, oscilloscopes, computers, and calculators, like the HP 35, introduced in 1972, the first handheld scientific calculator. One of the young engineers who works on it, before he starts Apple, is Steve Wozniak.
When we started, our calculator cost $400. The HP 35, that's, figure $2,000 today at least. Within 5 years, no scientist or engineer would ever want a $10 slide rule ever again. And why was that product so great? Bill Hewlett wanted it for himself, even though it was a money loser. They figured they'd only sell 5,000 and it was going to be a huge loss.
Hewlett's guess is way off. All told, HP winds up selling more than 300,000 of the calculators.
It was the most innovative company in the world at the time, and Hewlett-Packard was easily the most enlightened company of its era, too. Flexi time and stock options and profit sharing, Friday afternoon beer bus, all of those things were invented by Hewlett-Packard.
We respect the people. Our success is going to be dependent upon how well these people do their job. They're entitled to a share of the profits.
Hewlett and Packard treat employees well. They don't even mind if employees leave HP for other companies.
Bill told me, he said, it's okay to change your job. Labor mobility is a good thing. You spread knowledge this way. It's okay to change your job. Then he said it's okay to fail. Now, not too often, he said, but it's okay to fail. And I think this was an attitude from the beginning. You could be experimental, you could try something new, and if it didn't work, you try something else. You could start over.
These new attitudes about business inspire people in the Valley. Among them, a group of 8 scientists and engineers who in 1957 create the next legendary company in the Valley's history, one that will lead the Valley into the age of silicon and spark the creativity of generations of people to come. Silicon Valley might never have started if it hadn't been for Hewlett-Packard. But the Valley today owes an even greater debt to a lesser-known company, Fairchild Semiconductor. It gave rise to dozens more companies that are now worth more than $2 trillion and employ some 800,000 people. Companies known as the Fairchildren.
The Valley has been characterized from the beginning in its history by conjunctions of individuals who create great companies, and then it blows up, and they get scattered to the 4 winds. And the prototype of that, the archetype, is Fairchild.
Fairchild is founded in 1957 by 8 scientists and engineers who work at a Valley electronics company run by the co-inventor of the transistor, William Shockley. But he's an impossible boss, paranoid and abrasive. So the 8 decide to quit and start a rival operation. One member of the group emerges as a leader and eventually becomes general manager. Robert Noyce, a physicist who turns out to have a remarkable gift for business, especially for encouraging innovation.
Noyce was the ideal guy to work for. He gave you responsibility and let you go run with it.
He had so many different facets to him, but he was capable of really looking at the universe and saying, this is how it's all working and how it's going to work in the future. One of the few true visionaries that I ever met.
Under Noyce's leadership, Fairchild racks up a series of breakthroughs. First, it solves a problem that's vexing the young industry: how to make silicon transistors cheaply and reliably. In 1959, Fairchild introduces the planar process, which essentially etches transistors out of thin wafers of silicon.
The transistor is a truly remarkable device.
So Fairchild, they had a patented process which revolutionized the way semiconductor devices would be built from then on. This could have been the single most important innovation in the history of semiconductor technology.
And that's because the planar process makes it easier to shrink transistors and interconnect them, which enables Bob Noyce to link many transistors together into an integrated circuit, what we know today as the microchip.
In Silicon Valley, everything is based on change, and we were changing now from transistors that are tiny to chips that are even tinier. This was the start of it all.
The Pentagon, eager to take advantage of this new technology, becomes Fairchild's biggest customer. In just 2 years, contracts like the one for the Minuteman missile boost Fairchild's annual sales from $500,000 to $20 million. Gordon Moore, one of the 8 co-founders, is in charge of research and development, a job that requires looking to the future, which he sees with astonishing clarity.
I was asked to write an article for Electronics magazine. They wanted me to predict what was going to happen in the next 10 years in the electronic component business.
So Moore starts looking and notices that each year, circuits have twice as many transistors as they did the year before.
So I made the wild prediction that we'd continue to double in complexity every year for the next 10 years. We'd go from 60 components to 60,000, a 1,000-fold expansion during this time.
But you ask, who cares how many transistors can be squeezed into tiny places you can't see? Well, let me assure you, it is one of the most significant ideas of our time.
Moore's prediction of an exponential increase in the number of transistors on a silicon chip becomes known as Moore's Law.
Moore's Law is the most extraordinary discovery because it shows that for the first time in human history, we can develop things, we can innovate things at an ever faster speed.
Moore's Law guaranteed that Silicon Valley would have a huge economic rise. You could create so much more product for the same money every year than the year before. That was going to lead to 50, 60 years of incredible growth.
You know, current integrated circuits utilize up to 16 billion transistors on the little circuit. far beyond anything I ever would have thought possible. But it's still a manifestation of the progress of Moore's Law.
But during the 1960s, despite Fairchild's many successes, most of its founders become restless.
Fairchild had all this crazy talent, just crazy, infinite amount of young, brilliant engineering talent. The joke always is if they had just stayed together, it would have been the first trillion-dollar company. The truth is, given their personalities, they were never going to stay together.
In 1961, the breakup of Fairchild begins. Jay Last and 3 other founders leave to start their own chip company, Amelco. Before long, Eugene Kleiner starts what will become one of the Valley's top venture capital firms, Kleiner Perkins.
Boom, Fairchild explodes, scatters all these seedlings all over the valley, and that creates the Silicon Valley that we think of as a physical place. That's why we call it Silicon Valley.
And one of the reasons it could happen here is that in California, having a non-compete clause in an employment contract is not legal. So it's easy for people to spin out without great risk of being sued. So this is one of the reasons why we see this spinning out phenomenon still going on today.
Among the Fairchildren, the one best known today is founded in 1968, when Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore decide it's their turn to strike out on their own. For their new company, Intel, Noyce and Moore have a vision. They will use their mastery of silicon to transform the world of computers. But these icons of Valley success will soon face obstacles that nearly destroy them.
Everybody was scared. I was scared, they were scared. Everybody was scared.
Today, Intel is a colossus, one of the world's leading chip makers. Precisely the outcome its founders, Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore, had hoped for. Intel's rise was spectacular, but also at times terrifying. A story that reveals one of the most crucial features of the Valley.
The Valley has seen this cycle of boom and bust for decades, and that's been passed on from generation to generation.
The resilience of the Valley is remarkable because there have been many moments when it seemed like, well, this is the bust to end all busts, and this is going to be it.
In 1968, the year Intel is founded, Moore and Noyce embark on a mission. Silicon has already unleashed the potential of circuitry. Now, Noyce and Moore will introduce it to a new field, computer memory. So in 1970, they released the Dynamic Random Access Memory chip, the DRAM, a breakthrough in semiconductor technology.
Semiconductors put the U.S. on the cutting edge of a thriving technology that can be used in everything from toasters to robots.
We had a monopoly in that technology for about 7 years, which gave us a good opportunity to get established. We were lucky. We hit a technology that was just right.
But their luck is about to change.
It started because the Japanese were big customers, and they wanted to see the factories. And Bob, being the outgoing guy that he was, said, sure, come on and see the factories. They sent busloads of people. 3-4 big buses come by and spend a half a day looking at our factories.
When it comes to computers, nobody does it better than the Americans. But all this high technology has led to high anxiety in the industry. They worry about spies.
Each person was told what to notice, and they took pictures, and they went back to their hotels at night and put it all together, and figured out how to beat us at our own game.
By 1985, the Japanese DRAM manufacturers are outselling Intel and other U.S. chip makers by a wide margin.
We just reported for first half $42 million loss.
And soon, Intel is forced to take a drastic step.
So we made the decision to drop out of DRAMs. It was kind of traumatic, but inevitable.
Intel Corporation, a leading maker of data processing chips, today announced it will lay off workers. Intel said it plans.
Intel shuts down its memory chip factories and lays off some 2,000 people.
What is happening to Intel is by no means unique. As Jerry Bowen reports,
Other chip companies lay off their workers too.
Many of the jobs lost in this slowdown may well be gone for good.
Those are panic days, real panic days. You can't, with that kind of a collapse in price, there's no way you can survive.
All told, the Valley lays off more than 10,000 workers. Families lose homes. Marriages disintegrate.
There have been moments when the pundits are, writing, oh, it's over, that's it. And it isn't.
Thus far, everybody who's predicted the demise of Silicon Valley has found out 2, 3, 4, 5 years later that they were wrong, and there's a new wave.
For Intel, the new wave is a product whose future is still unclear, but it will become the linchpin of the devices we rely on every day. The microprocessor, which can do more complex operations than a DRAM. It can add and subtract, compare numbers, move data from one place to another.
So they, brilliantly, from my point of view, did what every company has to do. They abandoned what they were good at to take on something that they could be better at.
And they decided to pivot, is how we would describe it today. And the rest of the Valley kind of follows.
Microprocessors make possible computers that are smaller, faster, and easier to link together in networks than ever before. By the 1990s, Intel controls some 80% of a microprocessor market that in the era of personal computers is growing astronomically. And the rest of the Valley is rebounding too.
And there was a new generation of startups. Many of the individuals that were laid off became part of new startups, and you saw this process of recombination. And that's illustrative of what makes the place so resilient, the ability to really turn itself inside out when things go wrong.
An ability that would soon be tested again. A little more than a decade after its near-death experience, the Valley would be battered by one of the most punishing events in its history, the dot-com bust. In 1995, Silicon Valley begins the biggest economic boom in its history, one that will lift it to new heights, but also challenge its resilience. With the introduction of Netscape Navigator, a user-friendly web browser, millions are drawn into a seemingly limitless new universe.
Web pages were getting more and more sophisticated, and a lot of tools began to develop for doing things like making purchases online. Well, the venture capitalists were smart enough to say, this is going to be huge. We got to put stakes in the ground in every possible sub-market we see. We got to find startup companies, give them money, and get them going.
You have the right to remain where you are.
Dot-coms bought up television time, the Super Bowl. You remember Super Bowl ads? Those were $2 million each, and they were buying a minute during the Super Bowl. Pets.com and all of those.
I like your shorts.
For a time, Wall Street is mesmerized by what's happening in the Valley. In 2000, the value of the NASDAQ, an index of technology stocks, reaches an all-time high.
Those red-hot technology stocks had Wall Street sizzling. Today, the Dow shot.
But many of those surging stocks are in startups, like Pets.com and Webvan.com, that have yet to turn a profit. In March 2000, investors start to come to their senses, and the NASDAQ starts to plummet.
We lost $24 billion according to S&P. 20% less revenues than they did last quarter. The whole world's very disappointed in us.
All of the stocks started collapsing. And all of these companies were houses of cards. And so in the course of like 4 months, thousands of companies died. I mean, literally died overnight.
What goes up must come down, spinning wheel.
Companies that just months earlier seemed like surefire bets, like Pets.com, Webvan, eToys, and DrCoop.com, disappear forever.
After the bubble burst in 2000, all up and down Sand Hill Road, you'd hear enterprise software is dead, search is dead, internet advertising's dead, it's over, you know, how ridiculous was that we all thought it was going to happen. Meanwhile, the entrepreneurs are getting down to business, and they never stopped. I mean, they're innovating.
And few people play a more important role in the Valley's resurgence than the group that in 1998 founds PayPal, the startup that solves a big problem in electronic commerce: how to move money safely and quickly, which PayPal enables users to do by linking payments to email.
And so suddenly the commerce occurred in seconds or minutes as opposed to days, weeks, and that just enabled sellers to sell stuff a lot faster and buyers to buy things much faster, receive their goods, which encouraged them to buy more.
When the product launched in October, November '99, we ended 1999 with about 10,000 users, and by that summer of 2000, we're at something like 5 million users.
PayPal becomes so essential to auction giant eBay's business that in 2002, eBay buys PayPal, making many of PayPal's founders and employees rich. They use their wealth and connections to help start new companies. At a time when investment money in the Valley is in short supply, they are the go-to guys and become known as the PayPal Mafia.
After we sold PayPal to eBay, we had the ability to become angel investors, and there was a vacuum in the ether. And so we were like 80% of the market for angel capital. And it turns out some of those companies did really, really well.
The startups founded by the PayPal Mafia are worth more than $100 billion.
You haven't really seen anything like in Silicon Valley since the early days of Fairchild Semiconductor, where the alumni of Fairchild went on to spawn a whole bunch of other companies in Silicon Valley.
The Valley was going to disappear with the rise of Japanese competition. And the Valley was going to disappear when the dot-com bust happened. And then what happens instead is that the Valley somehow regenerates itself. This is why I say that Silicon Valley's greatest innovation may be Silicon Valley.
It's very Darwinian. Only a handful make it through. But the ones that make it through, we still have now. We still have eBay. We still have Google. We have a lot of companies that were created around the time of the dot-com bubble. And in fact, if you look at the charts of e-commerce usage during the dot-com bubble and after it burst, it's almost a straight line going up. It didn't even notice the death of 1,000 companies. It kept growing. And that's the real hidden story. That's what we understand around here. You're going to kiss a lot of frogs. You're going to get involved in a lot of startups that are going to die. But you might get that one. And if you get that one, it's going to shoot the moon.
In tech news, Apple closing at an all-time high yesterday.
Tesla's now worth more than GM, Ford, Honda, or BMW for the
Silicon Valley loves to celebrate its successes.
Facebook just hit 2 billion users.
But it's been stung by the persistence of some deeply rooted problems.
Another Silicon Valley shakeup.
20 people have now been fired after an investigation into a culture of harassment.
Silicon Valley has been rocked the last few weeks by...
For all of the openness and collaboration, it's a culture that is shaped by a male model of how to get things done. It's a hard culture for women to flourish in. You're required to be there 24/7. You're required to work very hard. Unless you have tremendous resources at home, you can't have a family and work in Silicon Valley. We need to change that model.
While the Valley is famed for its wealth, thousands of people can't afford a place to live.
We have the largest homeless community in San Jose in the United States. Part of that is we have really good weather. But part of that is also that we have an economy that drives people down toward the bottom if they're not floating up to the top. And that is a hard thing for people to negotiate.
There are downsides to being the epicenter of this. The opportunity is not spread to everyone. The cost of living is outrageous. It's gotten very congested here. And so there are a number of things that create problems here. The socioeconomic disparity it's a hard nut to crack.
But despite the Valley's many problems, the culture that has developed here can still lift some people to unimaginable heights.
We've worked on our service.
When it comes to technology, this is the capital of the world. Being here is a whole different ballgame. Silicon Valley is in this never-ending circle of this is where our best engineers are. Why? Because that's where companies get started. Why? Because that's where venture capitalists live and they provide funding for those companies. Why are they here? Because the greatest engineers are here. Why greatest engineers are here? Because the companies are here. It's this never-ending circle of life in Silicon Valley.
Jan Koum is born and raised in Ukraine.
For me, I used abacus in school because we didn't even have calculators. I remember seeing my first computer. I was like, wow. I mean, to me, it was just fascinating. It was like this whole new world.
In 1992, when he is 16, Koum and his mother emigrate to California. His father stays behind. Relatives help them rent a cheap apartment, which by chance is in Mountain View, in Silicon Valley.
The first 5-6 years of living in the United States were tough. We lived in public housing. We had to have financial aid, and we had food stamps. And it's tough on many levels. It's definitely not easy.
Koum finishes high school and pursues his interest in computers at a local state college. But a chance encounter leads him to a job on the network security team at Yahoo, where he benefits from a long-standing Valley perk.
The recruiter who was hiring me, he explained to me this amazing concept of stock options, which I knew nothing about. And I remember sitting in a conference room in Yahoo when we were talking about me joining the company. He was telling me, look, if you work part-time, we can't give you stock options. And I was thinking to myself, what are stock options and why do I want them?
At Yahoo, Koum makes a friend, Brian Acton, who helps him through times of hardship. The death of his father back in Ukraine, and when he's 24, the death of his mother. Koum and Acton stay at Yahoo until 2007, and then cash in their stock options and leave.
I really wanted to do something myself. I just didn't know what yet.
And then in 2009, he gets an idea.
It started with me buying an iPhone.
Koum finds himself annoyed that he is missing calls from friends when he's at the gym. So he creates an app that people can use to let their friends know if they are busy or free. He calls it WhatsApp and starts a business to sell it. Apple agrees to offer it in its App Store.
And that was such a big moment because it was a feeling of achievement. It's like, I've done it. I've built something with my own hands, and now anybody in the world who has an iPhone can use what I've built. That feeling of achievement, there's no way to describe it. And we were so happy when it launched, and we were so disappointed when nobody used it.
But Koum doesn't give up. He retools WhatsApp for a market where he sees room to compete. Text messaging.
It was expensive. To send a message to somebody in another country, to send a picture to somebody in another country over SMS was very expensive.
So Koum bypasses the SMS networks of the private phone companies.
We were able to use internet, just like Google uses internet, like Netflix, like all of the companies.
By switching from SMS to the internet, WhatsApp can offer unlimited global service for about $1 a year.
And it took off. And that was it. It was like the light went on.
Launching in the summer of 2009, WhatsApp 2.0 soon gains millions of users all over the world. Brian Acton joins Koum in running the company. And soon, Sequoia Capital, a leading investment firm in the Valley, wants to talk.
When we intersected, they were at about 8 million active users. Over half the people that had downloaded WhatsApp were using it every day. We talk about that as daily active usage. To have a daily active usage rate of 50% or better was astonishing.
Sequoia ultimately invests nearly $60 million in WhatsApp.
We were growing really fast, and our users kept coming back and using our product.
WhatsApp was now larger than Twitter in terms of the number of consumers that are interacting with the service on a daily or monthly basis.
By 2012, the white-hot growth of WhatsApp is commanding the attention of Mark Zuckerberg.
Now what's the big threat to Facebook? Instagram, WhatsApp, these new social networks appearing that threaten Facebook. What has Facebook done? They'll spend billions for WhatsApp just to get that thing inside their tent.
In 2014, Zuckerberg makes an offer.
Facebook just bought WhatsApp for a stunning $19 billion deal.
It's one of the richest deals in Valley history.
Facebook's largest buy ever.
On its $60 million investment, Sequoia earns some $3 billion. And Coombs signs the contract on the door of the building in Mountain View, where he used to get his food stamps. Today, WhatsApp is used by more than 1 billion people.
There is absolutely no chance I could have built WhatsApp outside of Silicon Valley. No chance. This place is magical.
There is this unstable, unpredictable element of it, which is why Silicon Valley has been so hard to replicate. That you can't just take this formula and plop it down somewhere else. That it takes time, that it takes a lot of different inputs interacting in different ways. But it just can't be predicted. And that's the beauty of it.
This valley beats them all, and it beats them by a country mile. And the distance is getting greater. And so you can only assume that the valley is going to keep going, that it's going to continue to be the world's leader. It's going to remain the capital city of the digital revolution for a long, long time.